Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the newest album from Rae Jepsen, Dedicated Side B. This is a follow-up project to last year's Dedicated, and this project here is actually an expansion of that project, considering some tracks that didn't make the cut for that record, and essentially this thing is just a full another album consisting of unreleased material from those sessions. This isn't the first time that Rae has done something like this before. In fact, with the release of her album Emotion in 2015, she soon followed that one up with the Emotion Side B in 2016. However, Emotion Side B was an EP, not a full-length album, something that wasn't quite as big of a deal, I guess. You know, plenty of artists out there have put out unreleased tracks in the form of an EP or something, but not a ton of them do it in terms of a full-length album or something like that. So when this thing was dropped, I was pretty excited to listen to it. I like Dedicated from last year, not quite as much as Emotion or the side B to that project, but I still felt like it was a really solid pop record. And with side B here, this is just yet again another really solid pop record from Rae. It has, basically much of the same elements that were on Dedicated, but it just plays them out in a little bit of a different way, I guess. Throughout this record, you get some pretty fun pop tunes. For anyone familiar with Dedicated or Emotion, nothing here is really going to be all that surprising to you. However, the quality of the songs on this thing are still just really solid. There's very few moments on this thing overall that I think are particularly weak, and it just leads to this thing, despite it not being the most groundbreaking release ever, it still leads to it being really enjoyable and fun. For example, the opening track to this thing, This Love Isn't Crazy, is a really fun opener to this record. It just has a really fun sound to it that Rae just pulls off fantastically. The second track on the album, Window, is another really fun moment on this thing. Some of my other favorite moments on the record come in the form of tracks like Summer Love later on the track list, a song that features this kind of funky instrumental to it that I really liked. The track immediately following this, Fake Mona Lisa, also has a really cool instrumental too that I really liked for many of the same reasons. And Rae's performances on these two tracks are some of the best on the record as well. Just two tracks that I will certainly be coming back to in the future. Instrumentally, many of the tracks on this record go for a pretty straightforward dance pop sound, pretty much the same sort of sound that Rae has been playing around with for her last few releases. You have a little bit of an 80s throwback in there. Occasionally you'll have some funkier instrumentals mixed into things as well, like on some of those tracks I mentioned previously. And also you will get some slower tracks on here too, which I think are some really nice breaks in the record. Tracks like Felt This Way, for example, which is a really nice, slower moment that comes towards the start of this project. Just another fantastic cut from this thing. And when it comes to Rae's performances themselves on this record, they're pretty great too. She has a great voice here. She always has, but she's still just doing fantastic performances across this project. She's able to pull together many catchy hooks on this thing. Pretty much all the tracks I've already mentioned have really catchy hooks to them, but I just really appreciate how, whether she's doing a really fun, upbeat track, a kind of laid-back, relaxing track, or even just something else kind of weird in this thing, she manages to pack a really memorable hook into all of these songs. On pretty much all of these tracks, Rae is able to pull together a nice mixture of some really solid instrumentals, some great vocal performances, as well as just some really catchy and well-written songs to make a pretty enjoyable project that feels like a very nice second helping, if you will, of what was on Dedicated from last year. And if you like that project, you pretty much know what to expect here on this project, and you'll probably like this one too. I do have some complaints with this record though, one of those being is that at certain points on this project it does feel maybe a little bit bloated for what this project is trying to achieve. I think if maybe you cut out some of the fat from this thing, some of the weaker cuts, you could have had maybe an EP's worth of really fantastic content here, because I do think there are maybe a few tracks on this thing that for one reason or another don't quite stick with me as much as some of the best here. Another problem I have with the record is that the flow of the track list isn't necessarily the greatest in my opinion. I mean, it's not terrible, all the songs certainly sound like they belong on an album together, but with the exception of the opener and the closer, which I think do a really good job at being an opener and a closer respectively, everything else on the record just kind of feels like it was thrown together without much care. I mean, again, all the tracks certainly sound like they belong on the same project, but the flow from track to track isn't necessarily the greatest. At certain points, you'll have similar sounding songs come back to back, and it causes some moments on this record that just feel a little bit bloated and a little bit unnecessary. Again, I think if you cut away some of the fat from this thing and just made it an EP, it would be a bit more to the point and enjoyable. Either that or reorganize the track listing to make it a bit more dynamic, because really, with the exception of the opener and the closer, having a few slower tracks mixed into things is the only thing that makes listening through this project a little bit more diverse and interesting, and it just leads to this album feeling a bit longer than it should be. Again, I don't think there's any necessarily terrible songs on this thing, but just the sequencing of the tracks doesn't play to some of these songs' strengths. And probably my last big complaint with the record is that some of the percussion on this thing, when it comes to like the production and the mixing, doesn't sound all that great, particularly on the last couple tracks on the record, mostly the second to last song here, Solo, which just has like this clicking percussion in it that just sounds really annoying. I'm not sure why, but every time I listen to the song, it's the first thing that grabs my attention, and I don't really like it at all. It just does not sound pleasant on the ears whatsoever, which is a shame because the rest of the song is pretty good, up to the standards of pretty much everything else on the project, but the percussion here on this track just easily makes it the worst song on the record as a whole, unfortunately. And the closing track, too, also has a bit of a similar issue, but not nearly to the same extent. I can still really enjoy the closing track here, whereas with Solo, that's not quite the case. This also happens a few other times on the record, but never quite to the extent of it being super annoying. Again, I think most of the songs are pretty well put together from an instrumental standpoint and a production standpoint, but the percussion at certain points, I don't know, it just didn't pan out the way that sounded good to my ears. But overall, despite those complaints, I still feel like Dedicated Side B is a really enjoyable pop release. I think the songwriting on this thing is really solid. There's a lot of catchy hooks on this thing. For the most part, the instrumentals are really well put together, and Carly Rae's performances here are just as fantastic as they've been on her last few releases. So if you like her and you like her recent releases, I see no reason why you dislike this thing as well. Again, I do certainly have my complaints with this record. However, they're not the kind of complaints that ruin the listening experience. It just feels maybe a little bit bloated at points, and again, some of the production here is, when it comes to the percussion, a little bit not too good sounding, I guess. However, I should say that, at least when compared to the original album that was released last year, which, for the record, I would probably say that both records are probably equal in terms of quality. I will say, though, that this new record here probably doesn't have as many lows, in my opinion. I don't think there's any tracks on this thing that are worse than songs like The Sound or Feels Right off of the original record that was released last year. I don't think this record has as many highs as, last year's release, though I do think the highs from this new one here are maybe just a little bit better. Not to a significant degree or anything, but just slightly better. Overall, like I said before, I feel like both Dedicated and Side B for Dedicated are pretty equally good albums. And they're both records that if you're a pop fan out there and you like Carly Rae's music, you should certainly check them out. But yeah, overall, that's just my personal thoughts on this project. If you happen to disagree, that's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave your own thoughts on this album in the comment section down below. Leave your favorite tracks. Leave whether or not you prefer this to, the album that came out last year or the other way around. Feel free to leave any of your thoughts on this project in the comment section down below, but while you're down there, make sure you also hit the like button on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. Things like album reviews, countdown lists, discussion videos, things of that sort. Again, thank you guys for watching, and stay golden.